Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. Hey, folks. It is February 26th, and this is another one of those days when I have to pre-record Politics Chat because I've actually got an engagement coming up in a half an hour. And I didn't ask for questions because what's on my mind is something that you could very well have missed, but that I really want to call out. And that is that as of the State of the Union, it's very clear that the White House has gone into full on campaign mode. And I wanted to call your attention to that in part because if you remember, what this administration does is it really doubles down on disinformation, on lies, and on attacks on marginalized people when it goes into campaign mode. So remember, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, and all that stuff that we heard in 2024. So what you're going to see now, everything you see now coming out of the White House, you're really going to have to take a look at and judge whether or not this is something that's real. And the reason that I say that in this particular moment is that this administration is historically unpopular. People don't like anything that they're doing. That's not to say all people don't like it. You know, Trump's job approval rating is in the high 30s. So there are some people who either aren't paying attention or do in fact like what he's doing. But these are numbers for a political character are really in the toilet, as we would say. So they really can't get out there and tout his accomplishments because for all the fact that the State of the Union, he kept insisting we're in a golden age, most Americans don't think we are. And objectively, we're not. We've lost ground in the economy. We've lost ground in foreign affairs. We've lost ground in society. We've lost ground in all sorts of programs that they've cut. The national debt is skyrocketing. If you're somebody who cares about that, I happen to be one of the people who does. Not getting a lot of play, but it's all out there. And all of those things weaken the constituency that's behind Trump. So they can't really get out there and talk about the things that they've been doing because nobody likes them. So instead, there are a couple of things going on. One is that they are reversing victim and offender. That is, and this is a playbook that the Republicans have used for a long time. The Republicans take their real weaknesses and they attack the Democrats for doing those things. And the reason for that is that then when a Democrat says, oh, but you did this, then they can say, well, everybody does it, even though the Democrats haven't done it. So that's one thing, that reversal. And I'm going to give you some examples of this. But then there are also real ways in which the administration is covering up major stories. And that's one of the things that interests me most right now. So there are a couple of things in which this really shows right now that have not necessarily gotten the attention that they warranted. So one of the things you might have heard in the State of the Union address was Trump talking about how he is creating a fraud commission and putting Vice President JD Vance in charge of that fraud commission. And then he went on to say that the Somali community in Minnesota, and then he said in other states too, and he threw in Massachusetts and Maine and one other, I don't remember which, he claimed that they had committed $19 billion worth of fraud. And that's simply a made up number. There's a history to where that made up number is from, but that's not real. In fact, there was fraud in the Minnesota Somali community. People have been charged. They've gone to prison. It's happened over the last 5 years. It's not just Somalis that are involved in that and so on, but that number is completely made up. And then Trump went on to say that if the new fraud commission catches all that fraud, we can balance the budget immediately. That's what Trump said. And that's kind of an odd construction, right? So what's he going on with there? Partly he's going on with the fact that his excuse for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act's extraordinary explosion of debt was that the tariffs were going to make up the difference. Well, now, of course, the Supreme Court has said he can't have those tariffs. So now he's obviously trying to manufacture a different reason for the exploding debt. that isn't the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So it's partly that he's trying to say, well, I can't make it up with the tariffs. I'm going to make it up by saying it's the Somali community, which, by the way, brings in, I think it's 67 million in taxes annually to Minneapolis, and is behind about $8 billion of economic activity in Minnesota. So this idea that somehow they're drags on society is, again, part of this vision he's trying to sell the American people. But there's something else behind it that really jumped out to me, because of everything else that went on this week, a lot of people didn't see it. And that's that on Monday, the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, which is a nonpartisan institution, which has the job of taking a look at the economic effects of any legislation that's put up, because there's rules about how much money you can spend and where the money has to come from and so on. So the CBO takes a look at the economic costs of different bills. And on Monday, they produced a study that said that Trump's policies, primarily the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, although some others as well, but Trump's policies have cut more than 10 years off the solvency of the trust fund that funds Social Security, and more than 10 years off the trust fund that funds Medicare. So, according to the Congressional Budget Office, in March of 2025, the CBO predicted that the trust fund that pays for Medicare Part A, that's the sort of the base of Medicare, would be solvent until 2052. Now it says those funds are going to run out in 2040. And similarly, it says the Social Security Trust Fund will run dry by the end of 2031. So this is a huge deal. The fact that this administration is just running through our finances in such a way that it's going to hit Social Security and Medicare, and hit those things soon, is the only reason it hasn't been a headline story, I think, is because, and it has, some people have reported Fortune. I read it in Fortune is where I found it first. But then, the story is, you can go online and find the CBO story, is because so much else has gone on. But I think already the administration is trying to say, oh, when, if people hear about this, it's the Somalis who did this. I promise you, it is not the Somalis in Minnesota who have taken more than 10 years off the solvency of Social Security and Medicare. And that's a really big story that I wanted to call out. But then there are other ways that you can see the administration trying to spin things ahead of time. So the other big thing that you may or may not have seen today is that the House Oversight and Reform Committee, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, that's the one chaired by James Comer, a Republican of Kentucky, who is not a rocket scientist, is obviously trying to distract from the drip, drip, drip from the Epstein files. And so today they had a closed door hearing interviewing former First Lady and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Now, both of the Clintons are going to be testifying. Hillary Clinton was today. Her husband, former President Bill Clinton, will be tomorrow. But they have already given sworn depositions, where they swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and all that. And the committee already has that. But they clearly were trying to get sound bites and pictures for right-wing media. So what's interesting about this is, first of all, you probably don't remember, but the Clintons wrote a letter to Comer, and I've lost track of time, a month ago or so, but something like that, I don't remember, sometime in January, in which they said many things, but basically the message of it was, dude, we're so much better than you at this. Drop this, because you're going to regret it. And that's when when he didn't, they said, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll testify. We want it open. We want cameras. We want the whole thing. And then all of a sudden you could see Comer and people backpedaling because they didn't expect that. And once Bill Clinton has sat for testimony in front of the House of Representatives, the gates open for any president. And already the Democrats are saying we have every intention of having Donald Trump in that seat, which of course Donald Trump has no intention ever of being in. But so this morning, when Hillary Clinton went to testify, she released a statement that I really urge you to go find and read. It's been circulated on all the social media platforms, but you can find it easily simply by Googling Hillary Clinton's statement. And that's probably enough, actually. I did that and it came up. I could click on different social media places where it was shown. Even if you're not a member of those social media platforms, you can click on it. You don't get a feed, but you can read whatever is there. You don't have to be signed in. I urge you to read it because it was really a beautiful letter in that what she said is like, listen, I told you under oath, I had no idea about the criminal activities that were taking place. I never met Jeffrey Epstein, as far as I know. I never went to the island. I never flew on the plane. I was never, I had nothing to do with this. And I told you that. But I would like to point out that, in fact, the committee compelled the testimony of 8, I think it is. Here we go. I'll find it. 8 the law enforcement officials who were directly involved. And 5 of them simply said to the committee, I don't know anything. And the committee said, okay, that's fine. And when they did have one person who was associated with Clinton come in, that was Les Wexner, who testified last week, and he is deeply involved with Epstein from the very beginning, none of the Republicans showed up. So it's a little hard to say, like, we care so deeply about this when they literally didn't show up for his testimony. So she went on to point out that, one of her hallmarks as Secretary of State was she was very, very prominent in her advocacy for women and girls. And she was instrumental in getting the passage through Congress of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And that Trump, in fact, has been gutting all of that stuff. He threw away 70% of the career officials at the State Department's Trafficking in Persons Office. So this idea that somehow they really care about human trafficking is crap, where she actually has quite a long record of that. It was one of her hallmarks as Secretary of State. She was an interesting Secretary of State, I think. It's a rabbit hole I won't go down. Anyway, she openly said that the committee was compelling her to testify, quote, fully aware that I have no knowledge that would assist your investigation, in order to distract attention from President Trump's actions and to cover them up despite legitimate calls for answers. All right, so the proof that this is simply what they were doing is in the fact that while she was in a closed hearing, which was closed by the choice of the committee, right? Comer didn't want cameras in there. Clinton said, sure, bring on the cameras. And he said, no, we don't want that. Lauren Boebert, who was in the room, shared a picture with a right-wing podcaster, Benny Johnson, who put it on social media. So they had to shut down the hearing I don't know what took place after that in the hearing, but it's pretty clear they're just trying to use the Clinton testimony and all that as a way to distract from Trump. What does that mean, to distract from Trump? Okay. Here's another blockbuster story that did get attention, but again, there was so much happening this week. Which is part of the plan, of course, right? It makes us look away and say, I can't deal with this anymore, which is, by the way, one of the reasons my letters are getting longer, but I don't even know when I've taken a day off at this point, because I'm sort of determined to be like, you're trying to exhaust me. By God, I'm not going to let you do it. I'm going to keep up. So some nights I sit down and I say, I'm only going to write a paragraph or 2 just to let people know I'm here, and I'll get to stuff later. And then it always ends up being really long because I'm like, no, I can, you can dish it up, but I can take it and I can throw it back. So anyway, this story has been out there a while. But there are so many stories in the Epstein files that may or may not be true, that people have been really delicate about picking them up. Like, nobody wants to trumpet a story only to discover that it was false, because then anything you say after that, people are going to be like, yeah, right, you lied about that, you lied about everything, right? So, and I'm not going to get the right date on this. An independent journalist named Roger Solenberger reported that he was looking through the files, and it sure looked like there were a number of pages missing in a certain category. And then he cross-checked them with another set of files related that should have been the same, that were in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And he said, whoa, boy, sure looks like there's pages missing here. And NPR picked that up. A man named Stephen Fowler at NPR picked up Sullenberger's um, report, and which is, by the way, why I always name journalists, because this is not a solo game. Like you're constantly listening, you're constantly um, trying to add new information, digging a little bit more, and that's okay so long as you say where your information comes from. And people are doing that a lot now, which is really nice because it shows that there's this information web to which we all belong. Anyway, Fowler picked up the story and he dug some more. And what they have discovered, and what other um, outlets have now confirmed, is that it appears that there are 53 pages missing in the Epstein file upload that they are pretty certain are believable accusations that Donald Trump in 1983-84 raped a 13 or 14-year-old girl. And this was the FBI took this seriously enough that it interviewed this survivor 4 times, and apparently considered the person credible. And then there was another story as well that also suggested that Trump had raped a minor. That was hidden in a different way, but this is, that story's been out there. You've probably heard about it. I'm not, because of the algorithm, I'm not going to repeat to you what she said, but it is graphic and it is not hard to find. And as I say, it's been out there, but many things have been out there that people were nervous about. Now, these different journalists, starting with Sullenberger and then going to Fowler and now other people, have put together what I would call the space around the elephant, the places where these numbers, each document is numbered. So the places where those documents were and the places where they were taken seriously, and noted that, at least in the case of the second survivor, this was a key piece of the evidence that put Ghislaine Maxwell in prison. So they're like, this is a really big deal. And people are picking it up and treating it like a really big deal, but it's maybe not getting heard as much. Like I say, because there's so much out there, this is different than just an accusation. And I use the word just there in the sense of not that you don't believe people and all that, but that when people recount stories, like sometimes they're never 100% accurate, by the way. That's one of the things they teach you when you do oral histories, but which is itself a really interesting rabbit hole. But there's either accurate material or there's not. And so the way that you ascertain whether or not it's accurate is you get other people to say what they saw. This story appears to have legs, and it appears to have other witnesses, and it appears to have been taken seriously. One of them appears to have been taken seriously enough in the Ghislaine Maxwell case that it was instrumental in putting her into prison. And it was taken seriously enough by the Department of Justice that they held it back, which is illegal. By the way, this isn't by choice. They were supposed to put everything forward and they did not. Now they're saying, well, we're going to do an investigation to see whether or not we should have put more material up, because they're afraid of the cover up at this point, because that's quite illegal. If you did that, you broke a law. So now they're backpedaling and saying, oh, we're going to look and make sure no laws are broken. But come on, like, again, I'm not speaking from a court of law. I'm not, any of that. But like, just by chance, you happen to pull the two most damning pieces of evidence in this particular document dump, remembering, of course, that we still don't have at least half of the Epstein files. So that's another place where all of a sudden you might be able to say to a true believer, Hillary Clinton, remember her? We're going to go back to the well to Hillary Clinton again. So there is that. There is, and as I say, there have been a lot, there are more and more drips and more people resigning over Epstein. That is coming. There is also, what is the other big one? You're also seeing all of a sudden a real push again for war with someone. seemingly it doesn't matter who, so long as they can get a war, which I don't really have time to go into now. But then there is also one of the things that the administration tried to do, or that Trump tried to do in the State of the Union, was to set a trap for the Democrats. The actions of ICE and Border Patrol agents are enormously unpopular everywhere in the country. Nobody likes them. Because again, Trump told people who voted for him that he was going to go after criminals, rapists, and murderers, basically, right? And it's turned out that fewer than 2% of the people that they are rounding up and incarcerating now, because they changed the rules so that once you're picked up by Border Patrol or ICE, you're going to internment, to a concentration camp until they can deport you, which is brand new. The country has not done that in the past. People expected they were getting rid of criminals, and it's turning out, of course, that they're taking anybody who is undocumented, but also a lot of people who were documented, and they've changed the rules. And the courts have been stopping that as much as they possibly can do. But this is really unpopular. Americans do not like this. They do not like what's happening on their streets. They do not like the things they're seeing about beatings and all that. They certainly did not like the shooting of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, which are really big deals. Obviously, I've talked a lot about both of them. So at the State of the Union, set up probably by Stephen Miller, who's been really pushing this story, who's the deputy White House chief of staff, who's the guy who believes in the Great Replacement theory, and he's a real white supremacist. I mean, it's really he's really open about this. Trump tried to say that he tried to make everybody stand up who believed that the U.S. government should, I forget exactly the language, but here it is. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Well, it's totally a trap because, of course, what the Democrats are saying is you need to protect the rule of law. We actually have laws about how one deals with everybody who is on the ground, who's on the soil or under the jurisdiction of the United States of America. It's not a question of you got to take care of all the citizens and every non-citizen can go hang. There are rules about how all of those people should be treated. It's a real no-brainer. It's not to say that you shouldn't take care of citizens. Of course you should. But you also shouldn't be incarcerating 5-year-olds or 2-year-olds or, doing all the things that the government has never been allowed to do before. And you certainly should not be getting rid of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which protects American citizens from having their homes invaded by federal agents without a warrant from a judge. I mean, and it's not that hard to get a warrant from a judge, I have to say. But they are now saying they don't need a warrant from a judge. They simply should be able to sign off on those raids themselves. And this is how you're getting these sweeps of people's homes. And remember the citizens who are getting taken out, the poor guy in his underpants and slippers that they pulled out into a van and drove around for several hours. And, just that's not America. That's not what we do. So they were trying to set up the Democrats, and they've been really, 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 really pushing that today. This is, Stephen Miller's like, this is stunning that the Democrats are so crazy. They won't stand up for this. I'm sorry. The word crazy came from Trump and the word stunning came from Miller. I put those two things together. And they're really hoping that it's going to fire up that base again, that the Democrats are the bad guys here. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. But, I don't know if you saw this story that came out, again, in the midst of all this. And to me, this is, well, I guess they're all bad, but this one's a biggie. So there was a man in Buffalo, New York, who was a legal refugee from Myanmar, where there's a genocide going on, and he came with his children. He was blind, and did not speak English, did not read or write, and could not use electronic devices. And he got picked up by the police because in the past he used a curtain rod to make his way along, and somebody called the police on him because they thought it was a weapon, and the police came, so we had a record, but that was the record. I mean, somebody called the police on him because he was tapping the sidewalk with a curtain rod. And the police released him, and the Border Patrol picked him up at the police station. And they found out he was in the country legally and that they couldn't, therefore, put him into detention. And so this is Buffalo, New York, lake effect, bitter cold, the whole thing. This guy he doesn't speak English and he's blind. And they dropped him off miles from his home near a Tim Hortons, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's like a coffee shop, Canadian-based coffee shop. And they didn't tell either his lawyer or his family what they had done. And the family's frantic, right? They go to the police and they say, we can't find our father. And the police checked and they said, well, he's with Border Patrol. So they closed the missing persons case. And you know where this is going. They dropped him off on February 19th, and the police found him dead in the street on February 24th. Now, this is a man who came to the United States because he was fleeing genocide, being cared for by his family, obviously, and he turned to America, and his family turned to America as a place where they could be safe. And nobody's really safe, right? We could all step in front of a bus tomorrow, but our federal agents took this older man, loved by his family, who were desperate, and they freaking left him to die on the streets in the cold. And I, that's right up there for me with Little Boy in the Bunny Hat, and who at least was with his father, right? And I'll stop. But when you think about what the Republicans were trying to do with that, we've set a trap for the Democrats. At the same freaking time, that guy was dying in the streets. I think that trap, political traps suck anyway. I'm sorry, I don't use a lot of words like that, but it's just, that's not, our government's supposed to be working for us, not working to keep people in power. And I hope that people remember in that moment that while Trump is sitting there and the Republicans are cheering on how evil the Democrats are, how crazy they are and all that, what they were trying to do was simply to make sure that people like this guy could go home to his family, which is what the legal system said, rather than Border Patrol officers dropping him in the street to die over 5 days, And a spokesperson for the Border Patrol said, Customs and Border Protection, which is the parent agency of Border Patrol, said, and I quote, Border Patrol agents offered him a courtesy ride, which he chose to accept, to a coffee shop, determined to be a warm, safe location near his last known address, rather than be released directly from the Border Patrol station. He showed no signs of distress, mobility issues, or disabilities requiring special assistance. Aside from the fact he was blind, couldn't speak English, couldn't read, couldn't write, and couldn't use a cell phone. That's what Trump tried to set a trap for Democrats over. Anyway, I'll stop editorializing about that because I do want to point out that what they're trying to do here is they're trying to change the way people are thinking about reality. And the reality is this is a fascist government. And they're trying to convince people to back that by selling them this kind of disinformation and lies. And it infuriates me, of course, because I traffic in truth, right? But if and when this doesn't work, the other thing that you are seeing is the real attempt to change our voting system. And as of today, there are two major developments in that. One is that the Trump administration is floating ideas that Trump will declare an emergency to give the federal government control over voting. It looks like the Republicans even won't try to pass the SAVE Act through the Senate. And then there is also, on the part of the state of Kansas, they are invalidating driver's license for trans people, which of course will make it much harder, or not much harder, make it impossible for most of them to vote. But also it means that it will be very hard for them to leave the state of Kansas and get to a safer state for trans Americans. And that, as we go into this, somebody asked me just a few minutes ago, what does the rest of this year look like? All of this is going to ramp up. All of it is going to ramp up. So find your torch, like Kate Barr told me to do, told us to do. Find your torch, because this is going to be really rough, and you're all going to find, I suspect, things that, like me, you find so abhorrent that you want to tune out. And just remember that they are doing this because their only hope right now is either to convince people that their lies are truth, and they are not, and we can reinforce the reality for each other. The guy in the street versus the ha-ha trap we set for Democrats, or by stealing the election. And that's something we all have to focus on too. But in that, at least, there are a lot of people working behind it, to protect our right to vote. The war for our minds, which is literally the tagline for InfoWars, which is what has souped up a lot of the craziness on the right. That's Alex Jones's media channel, in which called InfoWars, in which he says there's a war on for your mind. There is definitely a war on for your mind, but you have the ability to listen to what the administration is putting out and to say, wait, this is going to take some context. What's really going on here? And to make sure that's what people hear, and not the gotcha crap that's coming out of people like Stephen Miller, or the lies about the immigrants causing the real problem now with Social Security or Medicare, and all the things that I just outlined here. Thank you for being here. I should be back on a regular schedule soon. I don't know exactly when, but please keep the faith, and I will talk to you soon. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend, about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea Von Kampen.